I really enjoyed creating the challenge for you this week, so I hope that you guys enjoyed it too. First of all, I'm going to go through the solution where we have a row ID. So the first thing to mention that is beyond all importance is having this cleaned with data interpreter box checked will make your life so much easier because it fills down the store value names, the store name values, sorry, and just so that means that we don't have to do that ourselves, even though we know that we could. It just saves us some time, and it also gets all of our headers up into, admittedly concatenated into the headings, but that's still a lot easier to work with than having our headers split across, multiple rows. So the data interpreter is a lifesaver in this challenge, so I hope that you all had that clicked when you attempted it. So once we've done that, the first thing to do is to filter out any extra nulls. Now these nulls kind of aren't picked up by the data interpreter because we have that row number in there. So you'll see, for example, that row 8 has disappeared when we filter out the nulls, but that's just, why it was kept in by the data interpreter. So now we go ahead and we pivot our data. Now you can do this by dragging individually each of those monthly columns, or you can use the wildcard pivot, which I love, and I give all credit to Kate Brown for showing that to me at the Prep user group earlier this year. It's so funny how these things pass you by, but that is genuinely the most useful time-saving thing in Prep that I've found that I love. So now that we've got all that, we do a quick rename of our row ID because I still haven't renamed it. It was still called 123, as you can see there, but row ID is obviously a much nicer name. So we quickly rename that. And then we want to get out our months that we can see in, bunched up together in here. We want to extract those. So the way that I chose to do that, you could use a left function to get that out. You could use regex, many different ways you could do it, but I thought I'd use the custom split, put a space, and just have the first of those things come off, so that then I get this nice month column that I can rename. And then we want to remove each of those months from this pivot one names field so that we're left with just the sales, target, and difference separated by a space. So we do replace pivot one names month with nothing, so that deals with that. And then you can see that we've got some duplicated white space, so we just need to clean that up by removing extra spaces, trimming spaces, just to be on the safe side. And then that leaves us with a nice sort of cleaned up field here that we are going to use now to extract the relevant headers from there. Before we can do that, we kind of need to know for each of these rows, so for each store, for each month, what row number is that value, because we know that the first row is going to correspond to the sales, the second row is going to correspond to the target, and the third row is going to correspond to the difference between those two values. So we can see that our row ID goes in ascending order, so that's useful, but it's kind of not consistent for each store. So we need that to be a 1, 2, 3 value. So the way that we do that is we look at we take a look at our row ID, and we choose to do a fixed calculation, fixed LOD on there. And we're doing the minimum for each store. So we group by our store, rename that to be minimum, and then we do the same for the maximum as well. And that allows us to write a calculated field as follows. So we're calling it the order, and we're saying if our row ID is equal to the minimum for that store for that month, then give it a value of 1. If it's equal to the maximum, then give it a value of 3. Otherwise, give it a 2. Now, could I just have written in there, instead of the 1, 2, 3, sales, target, and difference? Yes, I definitely could. But part of the challenge was to make it as dynamic as possible. So that's why we're writing a 1, a 2, and a 3. So we get rid of a couple of additional fields we don't need anymore, and we move on to this headers step. Now, this is quite a monster of a calculation, but you can see it worked. So I think I'm going to split this up for you. So let me just take this out, this mid function. Let's just create a calculated field. We'll leave it as calculation 1 so that we can get rid of it in a minute. So let's just pop that up there. So what that's doing, if I just kind of hover it up here, there you go, now you can see what it's doing sort of here. So we're using the mid function, which if you're not familiar with it, let me just pop it up the side here. It kind of starts from wherever you tell it, and it takes the rest of that field if it's got 2 arguments, which this has. So for pivot 1 names, which is our sales target difference column, we want it to start from what value? Well, we've got a findnth function here, so let me just get that up as well. I mean, I imagine you can guess what it would do. So in pivot 1 names, we are finding the nth space. And what value space are we finding? We're finding the order -1. So where we've got the order that we just calculated in the previous step, then we want to find that number's space, but we want it to find -1 of that because, for example, for our sales values, we want it to start at the beginning rather than starting after the word sales. So that's why it's a -1 there. So you can see how that's reacting basically. So this first row here is we want this to be just sales. So it brings back everything still, bit frustrating. The second row we want to be just target, but it kind of misses out the sales at least and gives us everything after target, what we're looking for. And for difference, obviously it's kind of getting to that second space and it's giving us everything after it, which is different. So that's good. That's kind of the only one that's kind of right so far. So what we do to kind of change this around, let me show you this next function. I'll take that out and pop that in a calculated field as well. We'll just name it calculation 2 just to save time. So what we're doing is, it looks like it's exactly the same, but you can see that it's not. Instead of doing the order -1 now, we're just doing the order. So for example, if we look at a row that is to do with sales, then it's giving us everything after that first space now, so that we can get rid of the target and the difference by using a replace function. And then where we've got our second row, where it's doing everything after the second space in this calculation 2, then it gives us the difference which we'll need to replace. And then where our difference is already right, it's looking for the third space. Okay, that doesn't exist, so it's just going to return everything. And then we put that all together and we use a replace function. So we're saying basically replace from calculation 1, calculation 2 with nothing. And then that gives us our headers, which are all right. And we just need to clean those up a bit because there are a couple of extra spaces. But then that is how we get to our headers. I hope that made sense. It's a bit messy, but yeah, great fun coming up with that. I hope you had fun too. So now all we need to do is pivot our data so that we've got our headers as our headers and that those values going into the correct places. And one final bit of the challenge, because I just can't resist adding something else in. So we're taking that 3-letter month and we're changing it into an actual date. So we're using the date pass function. If I just open that up at the side there. So we know that we've got that capital M's for the 3-letter month, and then we're just adding on that /20 in that field as well. So we're doing a /YY for the year, just so that we don't have to do anything extra afterwards to translate it into the year 2020. So then you've got your nice clean data set that you could now feed into Tableau and do some analysis about which store is performing best, which store is meeting their target most often, which store is more often not reaching target. Do we need to adjust the targets? You could do so much with this. Be sure to check out our next video, which will tell you how to do this using the scripting tool. But thanks for watching for now.